How do you
Chris,
do? How do you do?
how,
Happy.
how,
I'm very happy to be here, Chad. I haven't been to Atlanta in a long time, too long.
yeah.
The, la-
Well,
la- the last time I was in Atlanta, we played Chaston Park with
Chastain.
Chastain, excuse me, with the Go-Go's. Tom
How
Tuck
long ago
and the Go-Go's. That was a lot of fun. Yeah.
was it? Like how recently was that? Like 2013?
It might have been even earlier than that. It might have
Okay.
been before that. I'm not exactly sure. But
Yeah.
we were touring the country, and that was one of our favorite nights. Actually, people have picnics and everything there, and it was really fun.
Yes. Over the years, I've heard a lot of mixed reviews about the foods, the stage side food service.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, it's a fantastic place to see a show, especially when it's not too hot. When the
Yes.
sun goes down, it's great. So how are you holding up amid the pandemic?
Well, thank goodness we're all well here. I'm. This is my residence, our primary residence in Connecticut, and Tina is here. My older son lives up on the third floor. He's a turntablist and a record producer. He's got a label called Craft Jerks, which does electronic dance music. Very, verging on avant-garde electronic dance music. And my brother is staying with us too, and we have a couple of beagles and a pit bull. And so we're happy. I mean, it's kind of weird not to be able to go out and meet people in person. Like my preference would be to actually be in Atlanta and actually, say hi to people and get some kisses and some hugs and stuff. I mean, I love that, but can't do it now. But I feel bad for the places where the surge is happening, the viral surge, and I hope with good leadership we can sort of, how shall I say it, put this virus to sleep.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it'll happen sooner than later, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just have to follow those CDC guidelines.
But it's a great time for reading.
Yes. Yes.
I recommend this one. It's great.
Excellent. Well, I have some questions that I've been putting together over the last week, so I'll just go ahead and get started. And the first thing that I was kind of kicking around here is I wanted to talk with you about your art school background and the training that you got at RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design. And I've written about this in sort of various capacities, but I think that one of the things that the book illustrates is that all three of you, David Byrne, Tina, and yourself in the beginning, were really thinking through every aspect of this group in a way that you don't see a lot of rock bands do. And one of the instances that I think really illustrates that is you talk about how you and Tina were toying with this idea, Talking Heads, and you made the t-shirts and went walking around the park to see what kind of reactions you got.
Yeah.
And I guess I wanted to bring that up mostly as a talking point because that struck me as that's almost like that's kind of profound to think that you were that interested in what the public would have as a reaction to every element of this band.
Well, it's funny, but that T-shirt of Tina's, that's the original Talking Heads T-shirt, is now in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So that's kind of a happy ending for that shirt.
Right.
But but yes, at the Rhode Island School of Design in Providence, Rhode Island, where I met Tina and I met David and many other people that I'm still good friends with. We got a good education there. I mean, the first thing they tell you is, look, there's no guarantees. Just because we teach you how to paint or draw doesn't mean you're going to end up like Matisse or, Andy Warhol. There's work involved, but we'll teach you the basics. And so the first year we got there, everybody takes the same course. It's called Freshman Foundation, and it's nature drawing, where you draw like bones and plants and fish, things like that. And it's also figure drawing, where you draw the human figure. I write it, one scene in my book is about this really gorgeous model, artist model that we had. And she was so gorgeous. but we also had to draw like senior citizens with no clothes on and muscle men and stuff like that. So there's nature drawing, figure drawing, and then there's 3-dimensional design and 2-dimensional design and art history. And that's called the Freshman Foundation, and every freshman takes those classes. There's no way of getting around it. And then after that, you can pick a major. Like in our case, it was painting. Tina and I both studied painting. David dropped out after the first year and sort of hitchhiked around the country and eventually came back to Providence and hung out on the, in the shadows of the town. And one of the funny gigs David had before we moved to New York to support himself was he worked in this hot dog diner. It was called, it was called the New York System. And David wasn't the only friend of mine that worked there, but their thing was you had to line the hot dogs and the buns up on your arm like this. Remember this? Anyway, so David worked at the New York System, and so then Tina and I got deeper and deeper into painting, but I was really missing playing the drums because as a teenager I had played, I started in like the 4th grade playing drums, and I loved to play the drums, and so I was missing it. So I talked to my dad, and he said, well, we'll bring your drums up to Providence. So we did. And I started playing in bands there. Am I drifting off the topic here?
A little bit. I'm still thinking about the hot dogs on the arm.
Yeah.
And then in the once in a lifetime.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I guess, to get back to the question was sort of how do you think that art school training informed the way you approach the music?
Yeah. Well, we were very visually oriented, besides using our ears, we believed in using our eyes. And I guess you could say that the album covers and things like that were just as important to us as the music. And for that reason, and also our appearance, we knew that we weren't going to be able to top the New York Dolls or David Bowie in the glam department, and we knew we weren't going to top the Rolling Stones or the Velvet Underground in the sort of notoriety department. So we just decided to visually be very kind of low key and like dress in the clothes our moms gave us for Christmas.
Okay.
And we didn't wear costumes or anything like that. So it was kind of like a reverse costume. It was a costume that was so normal that didn't even look like you were in a rock band.
Right.
We looked like maybe some interns for a architecture firm.
Nice.
You know.
Yeah.
And you know what? That worked for us because people are like, wow, those people look so normal. What,
Right.
who are they?
In civilian attire.
Yeah.
It,
But yeah, our art school background also taught us, pardon me, that it's very important to when you're doing a piece of art, a work of art, a song, to it's okay to be influenced or derive your ideas from somebody who went before you, like Matisse or like the Beatles. But you got to add into it something that's unique unto yourself, something that's unexpected and nobody else can copy. So that's what we did, and we were always conscious of being unpredictable whenever possible, and well, also we thought it should be sort of challenging to listen to, but not too challenging, not so
right.
challenging that it was, we didn't go as far as Philip Glass or Steve Reich, but
Right.
we got close a couple
Mm-hmm.
times.
For sure. I mean, it brings up a couple of interesting points to talk about, though. But and that is, in the '80s, a lot of the press that I saw, and even if you go back further, it seems like a lot of writers were really fixated on that art aspect of the band or the visual aspect of the band. But if you watch videos from back then, it's clear that this band had a lot of chemistry, and it was a pretty smoking live rock and roll band.
Yeah.
And did you ever have a difficult time reconciling these two halves of the band?
Which
Or
two now?
like there's the art half, and then there's just the fact that you're like a good rock and roll band.
Oh, no, we never had any problem reconciling that, or at least I never did. I felt like, yeah, we have this sort of a manifesto of all the things we don't want to do. Like, we don't want to wear costumes. We don't want to make sexist gestures on stage. We don't want to. We don't want to write songs that are cloying and kind of. We don't want to use basically any cliches if we can avoid them.
Right.
We weren't exactly sure what it was we wanted to do, but we did know what it was we didn't want to do. And gradually, we just by playing together in our loft on Christie Street over and over and over every night after our day jobs, we got to the point where we felt like we had a different sound. Somebody once described it as being like from the Twilight Zone. But it was had to do with David's almost high life, very trebly, almost high life rhythm guitar, Tina's very funky but classical sounding bass. I mean, like classical music, not like she wasn't steeped in the rock and roll traditions of Chuck Berry,
right,
and blues and all that.
Right.
And then me just doing my best to make people dance. So it worked well for us. People took notice. I think after our third gig, um, or shortly after we got started, a writer named James Walcott, who was working for the Village Voice, wrote a
Right.
big front page feature. It said, "Tired of glitter? The conservative impulse of the new rock underground." And there was a picture of Tina and David and me. and we had only been playing for a few weeks, so and if you live in New York, you know that, well, unfortunately it doesn't exist anymore, but back then the Village Voice was, the Bible. It was like where you got your downtown news and all the ads of where to go, and what gigs were happening and what galleries were having openings. And so it was a big deal for us to get on the cover of the Village Voice.
Did you have a hard time getting into CBGB to play that first show?
No, I mean, I've been going to CBGBs at that point for almost a year. No, wait. Yeah, almost a year. And in those days, it was still, attendance was pretty sparse. It didn't have the crazy vibe that it got later. It was,
right.
I mean, it was still crazy, but it was on a much smaller scale. And then, so I just, when David and Tina and I decided we were ready to give it a shot, well, first we walked through Washington Square Park with the Talking Heads T-shirts to see what the reaction would be, and the reaction was mostly good. So we said, cool, and we announced I walked over to CBGB's. It was an afternoon in May, the month of May, and it was in the afternoon, and I walked in, and Hilly was sitting there. The owner, Hilly Crystal, was sitting there all bar, and I said, "Hilly," and I think he recognized me from being there
just being regular.
Yeah, and he said, I said, "I have a band, and we'd like to audition to play here." And he had a very basso profundo voice, and he said, "Well, what kind of music do you play?" And I said, "Oh, we play in a style of our own." And he chuckled, because I think he'd heard that one before.
Right.
Or something like it. And he said, "Well, I guess I could put you on in front of the Ramones on Thursday night." This was like a Tuesday. So we had 2 nights to get it together. And we opened for the Ramones. And I heard Johnny Ramone say after our performance, yeah, they can open for us this weekend because they suck and they'll make us look good. So that was his attitude. But Hilly really liked us and kept inviting us back to play more. And pretty soon we were the headliner along with, other bands. And it was a challenging but really fun time.
Right. When was the last time you were at CBGB?
The closing night.
Okay.
The closing night. What year was that? Patti Smith played. They had two closing nights, and Tina and I went to both of them. One night Debbie Harry, Blondie played, and the next night Patti Smith played.
Oh wow! But you didn't play. You were just hanging out.
No, we were just hanging out. We could. It would have been nice if Talking Heads could have done a show, but that didn't work out.
Right. Well, just to piggyback off of that, in the book you have a point it's kind of early in the book where you talk about sort of the first song that the three of you wrote together, and it was Psycho Killer.
Yeah.
And so David had brought some lyrics, and in the book, the way that you put it together, it happens in this real kind of shotgun style. It's very fast, it's very matter of fact. It doesn't seem like there's really any looking back.
Yeah.
You know, he's got these lyrics, she adds her parts, you add your parts, and that's the song.
Yeah.
And it seems, I mean, did it really happen that quickly?
Yeah. Well, David had already composed the first verse and most of the chorus. The chorus was a little bit wobbly, but he had the Psycho Killer, qu'est-ce que c'est, fa 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 fa. He had that, and I was like, whoa, that's like the Velvet Underground meets Otis Redding. And he said, I've written this in the spirit of Alice Cooper. Like I've been inspired by Alice Cooper. And we were like, wow, man. Alice Cooper was number one album at the time. I think it was called $1 Billion Babies or something like that.
Right.
And so it was kind of tongue in cheek. It wasn't supposed to be horrifying or anything like that. It was supposed to be kind of fun. So yeah, David came to us and he had that basic part, and he said, the bridge section, I would like to be in a foreign language to signify kind of a psychotic disconnection or something like that in the character's head. And I said, well, Tina speaks fluent French. Why don't we have Tina do it and write it in French? And she did. She just sat down and wrote it in this, what has been described to me as very classical Napoleonic French. Not the kind of French that French kids speak today with a lot of slang, and it's formal, you know.
Old school.
Yeah. And I wrote a few verses, and we just sort of brainstormed the thing, and in a few hours, it was more or less finished. We didn't have all of the whole arrangement of the other instruments. David was just playing an acoustic guitar at the time, but it indicated to me, like after a few hours, I thought, damn, this is good. We should do more of this. And so we did. That's exactly what we did.
And the next song that you wrote was Warning Sign.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
That didn't show up on a record until the second album. More songs about buildings and food.
Yeah, it didn't make it onto the first album for some reason.
Right.
But we liked the song. It always got a good reaction when we performed it live. And so we put it on, Eno liked it, so we put it on the second album.
So the way that it happens in the book, when you write about Psycho Killer and then you jump right into Warning Sign, it almost maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it almost seems like the Fates were trying to say something by calling it Warning Sign. Because while this band did turn out a whole body of work and tour the world and become the Talking Heads, it wasn't an easy ride.
No, but it was a great ride.
Right.
You know? And what do they say? It don't come easy. Didn't Ringo say that?
Yeah.
You know, yes, we had a few bumps in the road, but the band chemistry was always great, particularly after with the original trio, it was great. And then when we added Jerry, I think it became even more complex and more interesting and more beautiful. And yeah.
So cool. Before we get too far away, I wanted to jump back to CBGB real quick.
Okay.
And you know, in the book, you say that CBGB will always have a really kind of special place in your heart, because that's that's where you got your start, essentially.
Yeah.
So after the 70s came to an end, Talking Heads were touring the world by the 80s. But the Talking Heads were part of that generation with Television, Ramones, Blondie, who kind of crystallized that New York sort of punk era. And by the time Talking Heads had moved on, a whole new generation of bands started playing at CBGB. And I know that like Tim Cappello, who is known as the sexy sax man, who had like 8 seconds of screen time in the Lost Boys, got his start at CBGB playing in a post-punk band, art punk band. The whole New York City hardcore scene started there with those Sunday matinees. It didn't start there, but it really sort of hit cruising altitude there with Gorilla Biscuit, Agnostic Front, bands like that. Tommy Victor from Prong was sound guy at CBGB, and I've even read him mention in interviews that he did sound for Tom Tom Club.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
Did you interact with that scene very much?
I went to one hardcore matinee. It was just like, I'm sorry, it was too. I could sort of dig the music a little bit, but I couldn't get with the moshing thing and the whole, fights breaking out all over the place. And that was just, I only went one time. I'm sure there were nights that were or matinees that were even worse than the one I saw.
Yeah.
But my kids that think that was a great period. And, I think the hardcore matinee saved CBGB because, the punk and new wave bands that had, risen out of CBGBs were gone.
Right.
That era was over. And so these hardcore matinees kind of gave CBGBs a recharge, which I know Hilly was very pleased about. But no, it wasn't really my scene, man. I was going at that point. I was going to the Mud Club and Danceteria and places like that, and partying my ass off. Yeah.
How did you feel about that term punk? Did you feel like you were a part of it? Did it seem like it missed the points in some ways?
Well, I don't think we ever fit the punk kind of requirements. I don't think anybody at CBGB's, except for maybe the Ramones, felt like they were punks. But I'm not complaining, because that moniker, punk, really got us a lot of attention, particularly when we went to Europe. They wanted punk. They couldn't get enough. They were like so thirsty for punk, starving for it, and especially if it came from New York,
Right.
So, like in Paris, if you came from New York and you played like punkish art rock, you had it made. So I'm grateful for that, but I'm also grateful for Seymour Stein. When around the time of our first album, we were getting not very much airplay, except on a few little college stations. And the reason is commercial stations, their program directors would say, "Oh, we don't play punk music. Talking Head, we don't play punk music. We only play good music." And Seymour Stein told all of the promotion men that worked our record to say, "Oh, but they're not punk, they're new wave." And then the program director would be like, "Oh, they're new wave? Well, I guess we could play new wave." And So then we were New Wave.
So Seymour Stein is the president of Sire Records.
Yes. That
And
was,
so he is the one who coined the phrase New Wave.
that's my understanding. Yes. And
With the,
it comes from the French term nouvelle vague, which means
Right.
new wave. And the French were referring to cinema, like Jean-Luc Godard and
Mhm.
Truffaut and so on. That was the new wave in France. I think there was also a new wave of literature in France. But anyway, yes, that was Seymour's idea, and it was brilliant.
So and it is kind of brilliant because punk was always the sound, the aesthetic. It always felt like it was very rigidly defined. And to this day, I think new wave is still pretty undefined. You can
Yeah.
think of a lot of characters that sort of, I guess,
Yeah,
personify whatever,
it
but
could
there's
be
a lot of variety.
new wave could be let's see, Blondie, or it could
Mhm.
be Flock of Seagulls, or it could be the B-52s, So
Right. So,
I hope you're going to ask me about the B-52s because
well, let's talk about the B-52s. Yeah, I know there's a chapter in the book about the hair.
yes, boy, they had some good hair. Still
Yes,
do.
yeah,
Still,
they still do.
and I'm so happy they're still going at it, and really well. I mean, they're super professional now, but they still have that incredible sense of fun, which we met the B-52s before they made their first record, their first little independently released 45 of Rock
Lobster.
We had a gig in Atlanta. It was the first time we ever played there at the Capri Theater.
Okay.
It was called is that in Buckhead or something? I'm not sure.
I believe so. Yeah.
I think it was. And we did a show with Elvis Costello, and we had booked the gig, and then at the last minute, Columbia Records said, "Can we get Elvis Costello on the bill?" And we're like, "It's already sold out, man. We don't need Elvis Costello." And they said, "Well, how about if we give you $2,500?" And we said, "Oh, okay." And so Elvis opened the show with his incredible band, and they were really great. And we did our show, and then afterwards there's a band called the Fans,
Yes.
and the Fans had played with us a few times up at CBGB's.
Mm-hmm.
They drove up from Atlanta, and they were real cool. We liked them very much. They had a little party for us after the show.
In Atlanta.
Yes. So, somewhere not too
Little
far.
5 Points.
Maybe that's where it was. It was not too far from the Capri Theater.
Mm-hmm.
In any case, we went there, and they had a lot of instruments out, and people sort of started jamming, and there was this group of kids there that I call them kids. I was only 25 years old myself, or maybe 26, but
Right.
They looked really cool. They looked like RISD kids, like art school kids. And we started, a couple of girls were talking to Tina, and anyway, we could tell. They said, "We got a band," and I'm like, "Yeah, you got a band? What do you call yourself?" "The B-52s." And I said, "Oh man, that's a great name. And by the way, that's a great hairdo you've got." And they said, "We'll send you our record when we get it made. And what's your address?" And so I gave them my address, and sure enough, not too much longer, I received B-52's Rock Lobster in the mail. And
Right.
I put it on my record player, and I listened for like 30 seconds, and I said to myself, yeah, I knew these kids were going to be great. I could just tell by looking at them. And it was the most fun I'd heard on vinyl for a long time. And
Nice.
so we became friends, and you can read the details in my book.
Yep. I won't give away the details.
Made in Love.
So that's a really cool connection to Atlanta. The fans are kind of a mythologized band around here. They never released an album, but there are some bootlegs of it floating around. But definitely highly regarded.
Yeah, I regarded them very highly. They were
Kevin Dunn and Alfredo.
Yes, Alfredo was the one I knew best.
Yeah, who is probably the person that I know the least in that group. But on the topic of Georgia, I wanted to bring this up before we get into the Q&A section of this. But you had an album called Little Creatures that came out a little later, and the artwork was done by Howard Finster, who's definitely thought of as a local, and there's definitely a talking point when people talk about Paradise Garden, which is just northwest of the city. Howard did artwork for an REM album, and he also did artwork for Little Creatures. So I was wondering if we could talk about that a little bit, and if you could tell me how did you meet Howard Finster? How did you find his artwork? And what was the experience like?
Well, I regret that I never had a chance to meet the Reverend Howard Finster in person. But by the time Little Creatures was made, we were doing pretty well with Talking Heads. We could afford to buy places to live instead of renting.
Right.
David bought a loft on Green Street, just below Houston Street in New York. And on the ground floor of his loft building was an art gallery called the Phyllis Kind Gallery.
Okay.
And Phyllis, I think she showed other work, but at that period of time, she primarily showed what's known as outsider art, something that we enjoyed very much. Guys and women who they hadn't been to art school. They just loved to make art. And one of the artists that she showed, one of the artists in her stable, was Howard Finster. And David was in the Phyllis Kind Gallery all the time because it was on the ground floor of his building, and he presented us with the idea of having Howard Finster do a album cover for us, and we all loved the idea. And I remember we said okay, and then like 2 days later, the album cover was done and in New York. I don't know how. He must have painted it in a couple hours. But I still love that album cover. It's really good, and I hope to get to the Paradise Garden one day. I've been nearby, but I just didn't have the time to go because we were on tour, and had an itinerary. But someday I'll go down there. I'm so happy that they have like good people preserving it.
Yeah, it's in a really good place right now.
Yeah,
and definitely worth the visit.
Yes.
I always loved the illustration that Howard did on the back of the album with the four of you in the pink suits.
Yeah.
I was wondered what the inspiration was, but who knows?
Those clothes we were wearing?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Howard didn't have anything to do with that. He just did the front cover.
Oh.
The photograph of the band in the back was it was from a boutique. The clothes were from a boutique in Soho called the New Republic.
Okay.
And they offered to let us wear some of their clothes for our photo. So we kind of picked out the weirdest ones.
Right. It
Yeah.
left an impression.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, why don't we go ahead and open this up for some questions from the audience?
I would love
And
to.
give me just a second here to scroll through here. We'll start with this one. This is from Josh Abelson, and the question is simply, how did you like playing CBGB?
Oh, it was great, man. It was hot. There was no air conditioning in there, so particularly in the summertime, it was like a sauna with beer. And what was so great about it was that it was like an incubator for us and for all those other bands that played there. None of us were seasoned performers. Maybe Patti Smith, because she had performed at a lot of poetry readings and things like that. So her shtick was down already, but the rest of us we were, and I'm referring to Blondie and Television and the Ramones and ourselves and the Shirts, and we were learning our stagecraft. And we were like incubating in this club. And the great thing about it was, in the early days, the audience was so sparse, like there might be 20 people in the audience. So if you screwed up and had, a bad moment in your set, nobody really cared. They didn't even hardly notice. And there were so few people there that even if they did notice, there weren't very many of them who noticed. So it enabled us to sort of take our time and get our act together. And then after we got our act together and we all started getting record deals and things, we still played there, but we were also able to use it as like a springboard out into the rest of America and Europe and, overseas countries.
Right.
And I'm very grateful. When Talking Heads, it was such a great night when Talking Heads and the Ramones were inducted the same night into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame at the Waldorf Astoria Ballroom. The audience is all in tuxedos and with,
right.
Record company guys with their wives. But when they called our name to go up and be inducted, we brought Hilly Crystal, the owner of CBGB's, with us. That was Tina's idea. And the reason we brought him is we were so grateful to him, because without Hilly Crystal and CBGB's, they're very well, we might not be having this conversation right now.
Right. Yeah.
And he was a great guy too. So we love CBGB's, and Tina and I, and maybe David to a lesser extent, and Jerry to an even lesser extent, but Tina and I would go back there often just to see our old friends and to see what new bands were up to. And it was, it was kind of like, how shall I, it was kind of like an ongoing party that just went on and on and on for years.
Right.
It was great, just great.
Very cool. So next question, this is Christina Ward from Feral House. She is the publisher of Richard Bach's The Mud Club book.
Oh, yeah.
Or Feral House is anyway. And her question is, can you tell us about the infamous gig at the Mud?
Sure. We were It was 1979. By the way, I love Richard's book, and I got a copy right over there. And I still do some nights with Richard at the Soho Grand Hotel where I DJ, and he has a guest list of people that come in, and it's really cool. But that particular night, it was in the summer of 1979, and we were about to release Fear of Music, and a British film crew had come over to make a documentary about Talking Heads called Channel 4. It was like one of the independent networks in the UK. And they said, they did interviews with the band, and they shot footage of us rehearsing in the loft where we rehearsed, which is where Tina and I lived. But then they said, we need a live show. So we need to shoot a live show with an audience. And so we said, okay, let's call up Steve Mass at the Mud Club and see if we can play down there. So he was the owner. And so we knew Steve, and we called him up, and he said, yeah, when do you want to do it? And we were like, how about tomorrow? And so the next day we set up our stuff. The film crew had very, very bright lights, which kind of, the Mud Club was usually very dark, but that night it was super bright, which kind of, in a way, stifled the audience a little bit. But anyway, we did our best, and we rocked out, and we played, for the first time we played Life During Wartime. The first time we played it live, and
Mud Club. Nice.
And you can see it. It's on YouTube. You can check that out. But we love the Mud Club, and people there treated us very well. I never had to. Richard Bosch would let me in for free, or the other doorman, Joey Kelly, would let us in for free, and there was a very interesting crowd. You might see David Bowie, you might see Lauren Bacall. I mean, you never knew who was going to drop in. And Dan Aykroyd from Saturday Night Live lived upstairs. So
wow.
So you had that whole crowd kibitzing. It was really
nice.
Cool.
So did Talking Heads play Max's Kansas City very often?
Only a few times.
Yeah.
Max's didn't have the cachet, for us anyway, that it used to have. We missed the heyday of Max's, and there were still bands playing there, plenty of them. But we were more at home at CBGB's.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, next question. This is from Cam Reif, and the question is, what was your favorite Talking Heads song to play live?
Well, for a long time, I think it was Psycho Killer.
Okay.
And then I think it was Take Me to the River. And then I think it was Burning Down the House. So, as we evolved, my favorite songs to play evolved also.
Gotcha.
But I always loved playing all three of those songs. But with Burning Down the House, that tour was the tour that became known as Speaking in Tongues. I mean, Stop making sense. And it was the Speaking in Tongues album, and Burning Down the House was a hit. And so when we played it, the kids would go nuts. Like, they would hear the introduction and they just go wild. So oftentimes what we would do is we would play it during our set. And then when we ended the show, if we got called back for an encore, we would play it again, play it twice. And I tell you, the audience went even wilder the second time. They were like, "Oh boy, they're doing it again." And it was just a really fun song to play. Uh, my
That's
percussion,
awesome.
my percussionist friend Steve Scales, who is so fabulous and so great, played those tom tom fills, and I just kept the groove going. Yeah, that's 3 favorites.
Excellent. Okay, next question. This is A Day in the Life Records asks, you and Tina have been a rhythm section in music and in life. What role did she play in assisting you while you were writing Remain in Love? Thank you for spending your evening with us, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Well, Tina had been encouraging me to write a book. By the way, she wants to write a book herself, and I think she's in the early days of it right now. But she had been encouraging me for about 10 years to do it, and then finally I got it together and did it. But she just gave me lots of encouragement and support, and allowed me the time to do it instead of doing something else that I might have had to do. And she's very protective of my writing time. Like, you'll have to call back. Chris is writing now.
That's great.
And then when it came time to do the editing, after I decided, well, this is it, I'm finished, then comes the editing process, and she was very key, very helpful. She's a hell of an editor, and she really helped me pull it all together, make sure that I dotted my I's and had my commas in the right place.
Right. That's it's no easy chore, and the chapters in the book are kind of short. Were you at a point where you would write a chapter and sort of hand it over to her, or was it more of you got the whole, like a draft of the whole thing out and she would go over it?
I wanted to wait till I was almost finished to actually get Tina's feedback, and because I was afraid if she didn't like it, I would be so crestfallen that I wouldn't go any further. So I wrote the book, and Tina was the first person I showed it to, other than my editor, my official editor.
Right.
But well, what was I going to say?
You wanted her to see the whole thing.
I was going to say that when I did finally show it to her, thank God she liked it. she said, this is really good. And
right.
So because if she hadn't liked it, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now.
Right. Okay, next question. This is from Carrie. And Carrie asks, Carrie says, your book seems free of rancor for David Byrne despite your differences. Was this a conscious choice while writing the book?
Yes, it was. And I don't feel rancor for David anyway. So I didn't, when I sat down to write the book, I needed two things: a title, and I needed the tone. What's the tone going to be?
Right.
And I decided that the tone would be one of gratitude and, thankfulness for my all the good friends I've had, all the great experiences I've had, and all the great music I've been able to be a part of. And so I had no interest. Now, you may read in some magazine or something that I've been really unkind to David Byrne in this book. I've seen
right.
that, like in the tabloids, but no. If I had wanted to be unkind, damn, it would have been a lot harsher. but I felt no need to be harsh. I'm grateful for the experiences that I had with the band, and I think our songs still sound good today. They still sound hip, most of them anyway. And I mean, that's our legacy. I don't want to mess up our legacy.
Right. Next question. Can you give some details on the creative process you all took in making Stop Making Sense? It's such an amazing live album. The visual and listening experience is one of my all-time favorites to go back to. And that's from Matt Nobriga.
Hi, Matt. The process was, well, it all came from the live show. After the Speaking in Tongues album, we had to put together a really good show, and we rehearsed for many weeks. We rehearsed on one of the piers in New York City, and David wanted to do the stage design, and we wanted it to be a different kind of show. David hired the woman that does the stage design for Robert Wilson, or one of them anyway. And Robert Wilson is a sort of avant-garde theater guy who does
Right.
very big productions like Einstein on the Beach, for example, and Philip Glass did
Philip
the
Glass.
music, and it's real high art. And I think David wanted to get into the high art kind of pantheon. So anyway, we had this production, and we rehearsed the band, and we were playing a lot of new songs that we hadn't played before, plus all the old ones. And when we took it out on the road, the show just got better and better and better every night. It was like we rehearsed plenty, but when you get in front of a live audience, you sometimes make a quantum leap, and we did. And the people, now I had to sit in my chair because I'm playing the drums, right? But the people down front, David, Tina, Alex Weir, Lynn Mabry, and Edna Holt, and sometimes Jerry Harrison, when he switched from keyboards to guitar, would come down front. And the choreography just kind of evolved. We never hired a choreographer or anything to tell people what to do. People in the band just started moving. And before you knew it, everybody was kind of moving in unison and doing these really catchy, running in place and kicking and everything. And it became like a real, almost like a soul review. I don't know if you ever saw James Brown or any of those review bands where everything is big, big, big. Well, it became bigger and bigger, and at a certain point, we thought, this would make a good film. We should get somebody to film it or videotape it for posterity, so that we have a record of it. And right about that time that we were thinking this, Jonathan Demme came backstage one evening with his girlfriend at the time, Sandy McLeod. And the two of them convinced us that, we had seen Jonathan's movie, Melvin and Howard. Did you ever see that movie? About the guy who rescues Howard Hughes from the desert. And
Right.
it's based on a true story. And it's sort of comical, but very very touching also. So we liked that. And we knew that Jonathan had started with Roger Corman making B movies like about, I think he worked on the Women Behind, no, not Women Behind Bars, but some movie about women in jail. And so we just decided to go with Jonathan. We felt we liked him. We also liked Sandy, and Sandy was like his assistant or whatever you want to call it. And actually Sandy followed our tour around the country for weeks, making notes of the show. Like, at this point, the drummer does this. At that point, the guitar player does that. So she made notes of the entire show so that the director, Jonathan, could then direct the camera crew. Okay, at this point in the set, I want you to be in that spot. Then I want you to be in that, and so on and so forth. And we did it at the end of a tour. We rented out the Pantages Theater for 3 nights. We sold tickets, and we shot the film. The director of photography was a guy named Jordan Cronenweth. Unfortunately, he's no longer alive, but he was the director of photography for Blade Runner. So we were very pleased that Jonathan brought him in. And so the thing about the movie Stop Making Sense is that everybody involved, not just the band, but like the crew, the lighting people, the sound people, the people who recorded the music, the cameramen, the director of it, everybody was like at the top of their game and really doing a good job. So we ended up with this fantastic film. And I hope that answers your question.
I think so. We'll ask one more question. And I'm looking at the list here, and a lot of this is stuff that is addressed in the book. So we'll leave it with this last question, and that is from Moira Sheehan. And the question is, do you still paint?
You know, I keep saying I should get back to painting, and I'm going to take it baby steps because I haven't really painted, you know, a proper painting in a long time. By the way, our younger son, Egan, check out Egan Frantz. He's a fantastic painter. He has a show up in Berlin right now. You can go to eganfrantz.com. He's a really good modern painter. But anyway, I'm going to take it baby steps because I haven't done painting for a long time. But what I'd like to do is my next book is illustrate it. Like have an illustrated book where I do the drawings myself. And I got a big pad of newsprint over there and some Conte crayons, and I'm going to get started on that.
Sounds great. Okay, well, we can go ahead and wrap it up there. If anybody has any questions or anything like that, you can follow up with us after the conversation. And like I said at the beginning, your books will be arriving soon. And we're done. Thank you for your time, Chris. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Chad, and thank you, everybody, for listening and watching.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, it's a great pleasure.